as we've discussed, muscles' job is to contract and to move the body or to move things throughout the body. So all muscle tissues are contractile tissues, but when we study the muscular system, skeletal muscles tend to take center stage because those are the workhorses of the body. So skeletal muscles exert force on tendons that are attached to bones, and as they do so, they produce movement. So tendons are connective tissues that attach to bones and pull on them, and when that happens, the body moves. So let's look a little bit at some terminology and talk a bit about some of these movements and things that can affect these movements. So the arrangement of the body muscles permits them to either work together or in opposition or opposed to each other to produce a wide variety of movements. For example, as you eat, you raise your fork to your lips and you lower it back down to your plate after you've put the food in your mouth. Both sets of those actions are accomplished by the muscles in your arm and your hand. But muscles can only pull, they never push. So generally, as a muscle shortens, its insertion, which is the attachment on the movable bone, moves toward its origin, its fixed or immovable point of attachment. So whatever one muscle does, another muscle can undo. So let's look at this image of a couple of origins and insertions. Okay, so here you're looking at the biceps brachii. So this is the big arm muscle that we all know. The origin is here at the shoulder joint. So you have biceps, that means two heads, brachii of the upper arm. So you have two heads attaching at the shoulder joint. Now think about when you flex your arm. You're pulling the forearm, the lower arm, up toward the shoulder. So the muscle fibers shorten here in the biceps brachii. So the origin is the end that does not move, and the insertion is the end that you would flex and bring up to the origin. Now I mentioned that what one muscle or groups of muscles will do as their action, another group of muscles will undo or have the opposite action. And that's what we have here with the triceps brachii. Okay, so the origins of the triceps brachii are here at the shoulder joint as well and on the humerus. And then the insertion is down here on the ulna. So as we continue to look at this, we'll look a bit more at these terms and how these muscles are working for and against each other. Now, in order for an action to occur with these muscles or for movement to occur, most of these joints are going to act as levers. So the muscles, are going to pull on these bones, and the bones will act as levers, and the joints actually act as something we call a fulcrum. So these two together just help to reduce the amount of force that it takes to move something, to lift something, or to get a job done. The muscle that has the major responsibility for producing a specific movement is what we call the prime mover or the agonist. Agonist means leader. So prime mover or agonist of that movement. For example, the pectoralis major muscle, the big muscle in the upper part of the chest, it inserts on the humerus, so it's a prime mover of arm flexion. Muscles that oppose or have the reverse action of a particular movement are called antagonist. Antagonist means against the leader. So when a prime mover is active, the antagonist muscle may stretch or remain relaxed. Sometimes, though, the antagonist helps to regulate the action of a prime mover by providing a little bit of resistance, so helping to prevent sort of overshooting the mark or to slow or stop the movement. So you might expect a prime mover and an antagonist are located on opposite sides of the joint that they're acting on. For example, flexion of the arm by the pectoralis major is antagonized by the latissimus dorsi, which is a prime mover for extending the back. Antagonists can also be prime movers themselves, such as the latissimus dorsi. Remember, that was an antagonist for the pectoralis, but the latissimus dorsi is a prime mover of the arm. And then, in addition to the agonist and antagonist, or the prime movers and the antagonist, we have muscles that are synergist. So synergy is when something comes together and you have much more action as a result of that coming together than by yourself. For example, if I wanted to pick up a very heavy table, I would be unable to do it very well by myself, but if I recruited others to help me, that synergistic effort would help us to move that table. So a synergist is a muscle that helps prime movers by adding a little extra force to the same movement, or to reduce undesirable movement. Remember, all skeletal muscles consist of fascicles, or bundles of fibers, but different fascicle arrangements can result in muscles having different shapes and different functional capabilities. So the arrangement of the fascicles determines the range of motion of a muscle, but also its power. Because skeletal muscle fibers can shorten up to about 70% of their resting length when they contract, the longer and more closely parallel muscle fibers are to the long axis of the muscle, the more they can shorten. So muscles with parallel fascicle arrangements shorten the most, but are not usually very powerful. The muscle power depends more on the total number of muscle fibers in the muscle. The greater the number of fibers, the greater the power. So stocky bipinnate or multipinnate muscles that we're going to look at pack in a whole lot of fibers, and they shorten very little, but they tend to be very, very powerful. So let's look briefly at some of these types of arrangement of fibers. So we'll begin with the parallel fibers. So in a parallel arrangement of fascicles, the length of the fascicles runs parallel to the long axis of the muscle. These muscles are usually either strap-like, such as the sartorius of the thigh, or spindle-shaped, as we see here. So this is known sort of as a fusiform, sort of spindle-shaped, but the fibers are somewhat parallel. This is what we find in the biceps brachii of the arm. Next, we'll look at the arrangement of muscle fibers that are circular. So circular should be pretty easy to understand, right? So the fascicle pattern here is circular, and when the muscles are arranged like this in these concentric rings, most of the time these muscles are going to surround body openings. So when they contract, they create a squeezing action, such as we have with sphincters. Here we have the orbicularis oculi. Orbicularis, orb, of the oculi, eye. So this is an example of the sphincter-like muscles that surround the eye. So not a lot of strength of contraction there, but very, very fine, precise movements. We also have a fiber arrangement that is known as triangular. So the fascicles are spread over a very broad area, and then they converge here to create somewhat of a triangular appearance. This is what we have in the pectoralis major, the major muscle of the chest. And then we look at the pinnates, so short fascicles in relation to the total length of the muscle. So these tend to be usually very strong contractions. So with a unipinnate, one direction of sort of feather arranged muscles, the fascicles insert into only one side of the tendon. So an example of this is the extensor digitorum longus muscle of the leg. With bipinnate, the fascicles insert into the tendon from opposite sides of the muscle. So you can see it does sort of give a feather-like appearance. And this is what we find in the rectus femoris, one of the thigh muscles. Okay, so a lot of strength of contraction here because you've got a lot of short little fibers that will be pulling in one direction. And then the multipinnate looks like a lot of feathers sort of side by side with all of their quills inserting into one large tendon. This is what we find with the deltoid muscle of the shoulder. And with this arrangement of all these short fibers that will be contracting and pulling together, this is going to create a very, very strong muscle contraction. And then finally, we'll take a quick look at some of the characteristics that are used for naming muscles. Some muscles are named according to their location in the body, such as the temporalis, which is located over the temporal bone, and the frontalis, located over the frontal bone. So these are two of the muscles of the skull. The size of muscles can also be used to be a part of the naming of a particular muscle, the gluteus maximus. So the gluteal muscles are what we commonly call the butt muscles, and maximus, large. Palmaris longus, a long muscle associated with the palm. The number of origins is useful in naming muscles. As we saw just a few minutes ago, biceps brachii, 2 heads, so 2 origins, and the triceps brachii, 3 heads. The appearance or the shape of a muscle can contribute to the name, such as one of the muscles in the lower leg, the soleus, is a flat muscle that some think looks very much like the sole fish. Deltoid muscle that covers the shoulder joint. The deltoid is a triangular shape, so the Greek letter delta is a triangle. The direction of the fibers is used for naming muscles when we look at something such as the rectus abdominis. Rectus or rect in the human body indicates something that is straight. So these are the straight muscles that we commonly call the six-pack muscles in the abdomen. We also have a layer of muscles in the abdomen called the external oblique. So external tells you that this muscle is on the superficial surface, but oblique tells you that the fibers run in an angle. So they would be running in this direction, if you can see the way my mouse is moving there. The sternocleidomastoid, now boy, that's a big name, right? Sternocleidomastoid tells us the origin and the insertion. So sterno, of the sternum, cleido, of the clavicle, and mastoid, the mastoid process behind the ear. And then finally, there are some muscles that are named according to their action and location, such as the flexor carpi. Carpi refers to the wrist, and flexor refers to the action of flexion. And then, of course, the extensor digitorum will extend the digits.